She sat alone at the defendant's table, fingers laced together on the polished mahogany, her posture so still she might have been carved from marble. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with whispers and barely concealed laughter. The Caldwell family occupied 3 full rows behind the plaintiff's table, a gallery of tailored suits and inherited arrogance, their collective net worth probably exceeding the GDP of a small nation. They looked at her the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered into a 5-star restaurant. Unwelcome, unworthy, utterly beneath notice. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine as they exchanged smug glances and adjusted their designer watches, was that in exactly 47 minutes, their entire world would begin to collapse. And the woman they dismissed as insignificant would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Before we dive deeper into this story, I need you to do 3 things for me right now. First, type your country in the comments below because I want to know where in the world you're watching from. Second, hit that subscribe button because we're building an incredible community of people who love powerful stories like this. And third, share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about quiet power defeating loud arrogance. Trust me, what you're about to witness will stay with you long after this video ends. Now let's get back to that courtroom. The morning had started like every other morning for the past 6 months. Elena Voss woke at 5:15, exactly as she had every single day since this nightmare began. She didn't need an alarm anymore. Her body had internalized the rhythm of survival, the cadence of someone who knew that every detail mattered, that one missed piece of evidence or one moment of unpreparedness could mean losing everything. She made coffee in the small apartment she'd moved into after being forced out of the Caldwell estate, the home she'd shared with her late husband Marcus for 7 years. The apartment was a fraction of the size, in a neighborhood that smelled like exhaust and fried food instead of jasmine and old money, but it had become her war room, her fortress of preparation. Every surface was covered with documents, legal pads, sticky notes in different colors, coding different categories of evidence. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, 17 browser tabs active, each one a different piece of the puzzle she'd been assembling with the patience of someone building a cathedral 1 stone at a time. Marcus had been dead for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. She still counted, still felt the phantom weight of his hand in hers, still turned to tell him something funny before remembering that the space beside her was permanent now, a void that no amount of time seemed to fill. He'd died suddenly, a brain aneurysm that gave no warning, no chance for goodbye, no final words of wisdom or love. One moment he was laughing at something on his phone, the next he was collapsing, and then he was gone. And Elena's life had split into before and after, the way a tree splits when lightning runs through its core. The Caldwell family had descended on his funeral like vultures circling carrion, their grief performative and brief, their real attention focused on the will, on the assets, on making sure the interloper, the woman Marcus had defied them to marry, didn't walk away with what they considered theirs by blood and birthright. She'd loved Marcus completely, devastatingly, in a way that made her vulnerable in ways she'd never been before. He'd seen her, really seen her, not just the careful exterior she presented to the world, but the scared girl from a trailer park who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through law school, who'd clawed her way into respectability with bleeding fingernails and borrowed confidence. Marcus Caldwell, heir to a pharmaceutical empire worth $3.7 billion, had looked past the designer clothes she'd saved for months to afford and the careful diction she'd practiced until her original accent disappeared, and he'd loved the real her, the one who cried at animal shelter commercials and ate cereal for dinner when she was too tired to cook and dreamed of making the world slightly less unjust than she'd found it. His family had hated her from the first introduction, their contempt barely concealed behind thin smiles and loaded questions about her background, her education, her intentions. They'd assumed she was a gold digger, a social climber, someone who'd targeted their precious Marcus for his money and name. They'd never bothered to learn that Elena had her own career as a public defender, her own sense of purpose, her own bank account that she'd built from nothing. They'd never bothered because they'd already written her story in their heads, and nothing as inconvenient as truth was going to change their narrative. The will reading had been a massacre. Elena had sat in the Caldwell family attorney's oak-paneled office, surrounded by Marcus's mother Vivian, his father Gregory, his older brother Damien, his sister Caroline, and a constellation of cousins and second cousins who'd crawled out of the woodwork now that there was money to be claimed. The attorney, a man named Whitmore, who'd been with the family for 30 years and whose loyalty was as much purchased as earned, had read the will with the solemnity of someone delivering a eulogy for civilization itself. Marcus had left Elena everything: the house they'd shared, the stocks and bonds in his personal portfolio, his share of the family trust that he'd been entitled to upon marriage, a sum total of approximately $87 million. It wasn't the bulk of the Caldwell fortune, but it was enough to set Elena up for several lifetimes, enough to fund the nonprofit she'd always dreamed of starting, enough to make her independent of anyone's approval or support. The room had erupted. Vivian had actually screamed, a sound Elena hadn't known a woman in a Chanel suit was capable of producing. Gregory had gone purple, his jowls shaking with rage. Damien had stood up so fast his chair fell backward, and he'd pointed at Elena with a trembling finger, calling her every name imaginable, his vocabulary of insults surprisingly creative for someone who'd coasted through an Ivy League education on legacy admissions and family donations. Caroline had been quieter but somehow more vicious, her words surgical strikes designed to wound in ways that would leave no visible scars. They'd promised to fight it, promised to drag her through every court in the country, promised to destroy her reputation, her career, her life, and Elena had sat there, still numb from grief, still unable to fully process that Marcus was gone, and she'd absorbed their hatred like rain, letting it soak into her skin until she was drenched with the understanding that she was now at war with people who had unlimited resources and absolutely no conscience.